Good morning. I'm Randy Fiorini, Chairman of the Delta Stewardship Council. We're at Fiorini Ranch, my farming operation, family-owned since 1909 here in Delhi, California. I was born and raised in the Turlock area. I grew up on a family farm where we're operating from today. My grandfather settled here in 1909 on 320 acres of the then unirrigated prairie land with the anticipation that irrigation would be introduced to the area in the near future. So the family began as a dry land farming operation with dairy cows and growing mostly milo as the feed crop. That evolved into permanent crops, beginning with wine grapes and then later apricots, peaches. We had a fruit drying operation that began in the 1950s. When I was born, we were farming peaches and wine grapes, and I fell in love with the work. I loved working outside. Our family was very much oriented to this land, as well as the Sierras. Our annual vacations prior to harvest each year were in the Yosemite area, where we would hike and fish all over. So outdoors was very attractive to me. I made a decision when I was a junior in high school that I wanted to choose this as a career. Then applied and was accepted to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, where I majored in, of all things, fruit science. My goal was to get through college as quickly as possible. So by the end of my third year, I had only 7 units remaining to graduate. So I nearly completed my goal of getting my degree in 3 years. I ended up with a Bachelor of Science degree in fruit science. I actually stayed another year in San Luis Obispo and worked as a teacher's assistant in the crops department. That was probably the most money I've ever made in my life in 1 year relative to the cost of living. But I had an opportunity to continue teaching, but the draw to come back and take over the family farm was much stronger. And so I returned here in 1975. Since that time, the operation has grown a little bit. We have phased out of wine grapes and have mostly almonds, with still some peaches and some walnuts. I now farm with my son and my youngest daughter, who fortunately are here full-time managing the operation during my absence, during my tour of duty in Sacramento as the chairman of the Delta Stewardship Council. My grandfather was Francis Fiorini, born in Italy, immigrated to this country when he was in 9-10 years old. His mother was killed, or actually died from disease following an earthquake in Guatemala. His father then sent him on to a family friend in San Francisco. The father returned to Italy, never to be heard from again. So my grandfather, at an early age, pretty much grew up on his own. He knew nothing about farming. He earned most of his wealth in the lumber business in Washington State, invested in some property in Los Angeles, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach area. He read in the paper that there was going to be an intersection of 2 railroads in this little place called Delhi in the San Joaquin Valley. And that was the original attraction, to sell the property in Redondo Beach and Hermosa Beach to move to this, what he thought was going to be a boom town. The first year, when he moved here, there were 2 boys, my dad's oldest brother, my father. The first year they lived in a tent while they developed the 320 acres that they had purchased, anticipating that irrigation would come, which it did. They settled here in 1909. The Turlock Irrigation District began delivering water soon after that, and then based on the diversion dam at LaGrange that was built in 1900, the canal system that was developed. My grandfather wasn't so much a leader in the water industry as he was in the farming industry. So as irrigation came and the challenge to do something besides growing Milo in support of small dairy herds, he moved into the wine grape and in particular the peach business. In the early days, they had nutritional problems, or at least that's what they learned later, nutritional problems with the peaches that were planted here. He worked very closely with UC Davis, what became the Cooperative Extension, to figure out what was the problem. They would dig holes manually and replace the dirt because they thought there was a problem with the soil. Ultimately, they found out there was a zinc deficiency. And so he was a leader in the early days in determining what kinds of farming practices would lead to sustainable farming.
So your experience here on the farm, what led you to get involved in politics? What was the progression?
Well, my father was a leader in the ag industry. He served on the Clean Peach Advisory Board. He was one of the founding members of a fruit and vegetable processing cooperative called California Canners and Growers. And as a kid, I looked up to Dad. He was very highly thought of among his peers, respected as an honest and hardworking man, and that became my role model. When I graduated from school, my focus was on helping get the ranch growing and do everything I could to make it profitable. But eventually I started receiving calls, would you do this, would you do that? My initial role in public or industry service was on the Merced County Farm Bureau Board. I served as a board member, ultimately became the president of the Merced County Farm Bureau. And it seems like at every step of my career, one experience led to another open door that led to the next. So there was a series of opportunities, and I enjoyed the working with others in the industry to solve problems and to set policies. In the industry-wise, I served on the Merced County Farm Bureau. I served on the California Clean Peach Advisory Board. Served on a foundation locally, the Norman Ross Foundation, named after a very famous farm advisor in our area, that was established to encourage college students to pursue cooperative ag as a career. That led to an invitation to serve on the local hospital board, which at about the same time led to an invitation to consider running for director of the Turlock Irrigation District. I had been in the California Ag Leadership Program and was exposed to statewide water policy through that and was fascinated by it. So it was timely that our local Turlock Irrigation District Director, who was anticipating retiring, when he came to me, my mind was open to serving in that role. So that led to a contested election the first time around, which I learned I don't like politics. I don't like running for office. I was devastated on election night when 35% of the people voted for somebody else. I thought there was something wrong with me. But I got over that. I served 4 terms as a director of the Turlock Irrigation District, 16 years. That led to representing the Turlock Irrigation District on the Association of California Water Agencies board, where several events happened that ultimately resulted in me being elected as the vice president, later the president of the Association of California Water Agencies. When my 16th year as a Turlock Irrigation District Director came to an end, it was at the same time my 2 years as past president of Aqua came to an end. It was also my tour of duty as a board member and past president of the Farm Water Coalition came to an end. So it was a nice, neat time to end my water career. In December of, that would have been 2009, I announced that I was going to take 6 months off from public service and focus on learning how to play golf. I'd worked so hard all my life and never really devoted much time to things like that. Never felt I had time. So this was my great opportunity to test my skills and see if I could become a member of the Professional Golf Association. 6 weeks into my retirement, I received a call from John Moffett, who was in Governor Schwarzenegger's administration, asking if I would be willing to serve on this new state agency called the Delta Stewardship Council. I was with another member of the water community driving home from visiting someone who was ill and dying. And he overheard the conversation, asked me what that was about. I said, well, it was the governor's office. They asked me if I would serve on the Delta Stewardship Council. He said, what did you tell him? I said, you heard what I said. I said, no, I don't think I qualified and could do that. And he said, why in the world would you tell him that? That's a great opportunity to carry on with the knowledge and the experience that you've gained at the local level, at the state level. I said, well, you know, I've told you I'm taking 6 months off to learn how to play golf. He said, I've seen you play golf. You suck. Call him back and tell him you'll do it. So I didn't call him back. They said they would give me a couple of weeks to think about it. And in that time, I received calls from, I don't know if my friend had alerted others or how they knew, but I got calls from several people all over the state suggesting that I should reconsider. I did, and I'm really glad I did. I've really enjoyed serving first the 4 years as the vice chairman of the Stewardship Council, and now into my second year as the full-time chairman. It's fascinating work. I've met a number of really, really dedicated, hardworking people. No one seems to be lined up in the same orientation about what the solutions are, but we certainly have a lot of agreement on what the problems are. In 2009, the legislature met in special session. This was, I think, the third attempt over the previous 4 or 5 years to wrestle with the complex water policies and challenges that were facing the state and to find a solution. Early on, the driver was a belief that there was a need for additional surface and groundwater storage. And that was the driver of the first couple of special sessions. By 2009, we were in the third year of a drought, and there was a recognition that to solve California's long-term water supply needs, there was going to be a need for more than just add storage. So the legislature got together with the Schwarzenegger administration and put together the Delta Reform Act. They recognize that water supply alone, without addressing the environmental concerns and decline of the Delta, which is the switchyard or the hub of water transferred from Northern California, where 2/3 of the water falls, to Southern and coastal California, where 1/3 of the rainfall falls, but 2/3 of the population live. So the Delta was key to helping provide water where people live. The 2009 Delta Reform Act addressed for the first time as a policy of the state of California that water supply reliability and a healthy restored ecosystem in the Delta were equal, and that both needed to be solved concurrently. The Delta Stewardship Council was established as a new way of governing water policy in California. Prior to the formation of the Delta Stewardship Council, there was no agency established to develop a long-term management plan for water supply reliability while addressing the ecosystem needs in the Delta. There are over 200 state, local, federal agencies that have responsibilities and regulatory authority in the Delta. But prior to the 2009 legislation, it was agreed upon that these agencies operate in silos. Very seldom do they interconnect or cooperate with one another because of their statutory responsibilities, and that it would be the Delta Stewardship Council's role to help to coordinate the activities of these many agencies to help foster better communication, better working relationships that would theoretically lead to greater cooperation and a quicker pace at addressing some of the problems related to now the policy of the state of California, the co-equal goals of water supply reliability for the state and a restored healthy ecosystem for the Delta, with the third leg of the stool recognizing the Delta is an evolving place where people live, work, and recreate, and is important as a region as well as a place where water is transferred. Yeah, just taking the state agencies that are involved in water policy, you have within the Resources Agency, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Water Resources that are the thrust of water and environmental work. You've got on the water rights side, the State Water Resources Control Board that's a part of the Environmental Protection Agency of California. These agencies or departments have separate responsibilities, and they have regulatory authority. The Delta Stewardship Council parachutes in as a new agency with the responsibility to help coordinate agencies like this, but lacks the authority to set much in the way of regulatory standards. We do have some authority, and that authority was given to us. It's called Covered Action Authority. Essentially, once the Delta Plan was developed, it was determined by the legislature to be a long-term, legally enforceable management plan for the Delta to achieve the co-equal goals. So any actions that take place in the Delta that are a part of the Department of Water Resources or Fish and Wildlife, for example, habitat restoration or water-related activities, they must be consistent with the Delta Plan. That's where our authority lies. And so those agencies voluntarily will file a certificate of consistency, and there's an appeal process if somebody disagrees that would come back to us. The biggest covered action that's in play right now as a result of unwinding the conveyance portion of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan into what's now called WaterFix, that BDCP had a special place carved out for it by the legislature, telling the Delta Stewardship Council, if BDCP were to be permitted, it shall be included in the Delta Plan. Now that WaterFix and EcoRestore essentially are separate covered action programs, they will have to be certified consistent with the Delta plan and come to us with that certification. So that puts the Delta Stewardship Council in a pretty important role, but not until the work of all of the other agencies, state and federal, have been completed and the project is essentially considered permitted and ready to go. A little before 2004, I was the vice chairman at the Association of California Water Agencies. The association annually would set priorities and have a strategic planning session. And it was during one of those strategic planning sessions that I suggested that Aqua was the agency that was made up of water experts. And who better to prescribe the list of things that the state should focus on over the near to midterm. We agreed to do this. I chaired that committee. There were 25 members representing water agencies from all over the state, and we ultimately developed a blueprint for California water. When it came to addressing conveyance, by that time it was recognized that there was a conflict between moving water through the Delta and the endangered species, the fish species, that seemed to be in decline. There was agreement on a number of issues included in the blueprint for California water, but there was not an agreement on what should be done about improving conveyance. So our recommendation in the blueprint was to call upon the governor to assign a blue ribbon task force to look into that issue. The blueprint was well received, and in fact, ultimately, Governor Schwarzenegger appointed the Blue Ribbon Task Force. It was chaired by Phil Eisenberg. They spent 2 years developing a list of recommendations, and one of the recommendations was to improve conveyance. They needed to create a dual conveyance system. At that time, it was to improve through Delta conveyance as well as add a peripheral canal to provide an alternative to work in conjunction with the through Delta. So that was the beginning of a reintroduction to the public square of discussions about conveyance. Since 1982, when Proposition 1 failed miserably, no one had talked much about a peripheral canal or a conveyance solution. So it reintroduced the debate, and ultimately, at about the same time the Blue Ribbon Task Force was winding up their work, the Resources Agency began looking into a habitat conservation plan approach, a National Communities Conservation Plan approach, a landscape level approach to deal with issues in the Delta, including conveyance and habitat restoration. So the genesis of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and the recommendations coming out of the Blue Ribbon Task Force occurred at about the same time. Fast forward to the Delta Stewardship Council developing the Delta Plan, we elected to, because the Resources Agency was already plowing that furrow policy-wise to develop a comprehensive solution to conveyance and habitat restoration, the Delta Stewardship Council elected to wait and see how far that work went. Well, once the BDCP ran up against the difficulty of getting a 50-year permit, which would really be the basis for the Habitat Conservation Plan, once they bifurcated BDCP and elected to pursue water fix, then the Delta Stewardship Council did what we said we would do in Appendix A of the Delta Plan, and that would be to take a look at providing options for conveyance, storage, and the operations of both to achieve the co-equal goals. We've been working on that. We have a set of principles that we've developed, and we will soon have recommendations and regulations for the public to respond to as an amendment to the Delta plan. So that's as far as we have gone thus far. Of course, we're watching very carefully the multiple phased activities related to water fix at the State Water Board, the Fish and Wildlife permits, the Army Corps of Engineer permits, the federal EPA permit requirements. There's a lot of circles in motion right now, and we're watching as attentively as anyone is to see where this all leads.
What is the budget of the Delta Stewardship?
The budget varies. One of the difficulties in state government is unless you have designated stream of funding through the budget, you're annually going before the Finance Committee and presenting a plan and a request. About a third of our staff makes up the Delta Science program, and the Delta Science program is made up of people that don't go out in the field and do science, but review the data that's collected, help to synthesize information that can be presented in a way that policymakers can use to make better informed decisions. Our budget varies annually, and the legislature has increasingly become aware of the important role that the Stewardship Council plays in terms of our planning and covered action functions, our early consultation functions, as well as the Delta Science Program's functions to help promote best available science, which is a legislative requirement. So our budget has been growing slowly over the last 4 years. The first 3.5 years, we lived on money carried over from the old CalFed program. So, $4 to $5 million as state agencies go is not a lot of money. The growing component in that hopefully will be funding science, so we can help better inform the many policymakers, decision makers towards better outcomes.
If the Twin Tunnels doesn't succeed, where do you go from there? Do you think you'll know within the next year or two if it's going to succeed or not? Because at one of your last meetings or someplace I heard that that it was really important to push in the next 6 months while Obama was still in office and before Jerry Brown's next term expires. So there seems to be a time frame there to make decisions. What do you think?
Well, I think that there's a lot of political calculus going on at the federal and the state level to determine how to best and most effectively move forward a number of initiatives, including water fix. From the Delta Stewardship Council's perspective, the co-equal goals are our constituency. And the co-equal goals are our constituency. We don't answer to any particular interest group. Our goal is to promote the co-equal goals. So water supply reliability for many in this state hinges on the ability to move water through the Delta effectively. It's clear through the last 4 years of drought that that's not working well in some parts of the state. In other parts of the state, water supply reliability hasn't been as big a problem. So that's a problem that continues to need a solution. But at the same time, we've got fish species that continue to decline. And although there's a linkage that many make to the export pumps and the operation of the exports, when you look at all the steps that have been taken to try and reduce the conflict between exports and fish, the fish continue to decline. Smelt are on the verge. We've had a symposium conducted at UC Davis 3 months ago. The title was, are they extinct? And the discussion revolving around those 2 days was, how do we know when a species reaches extinction? And there are a number of factors that have been identified. In addition to flows, there's the land-water connection. When you look at the Delta today, at one time, 50 to 100% of the Delta was flooded, inundated, either through tidal flows or runoff from the Sierras. Today, 90% of that land is cut off from water. So scientists tell us that we need to reintroduce water in the floodplains to help improve the food web, which many of the fish that we're trying to save depend on for their health. Pollution. There are 10 wastewater discharge plants that discharge into the Delta. There's a theory, well, it's more than a theory, science believes that the ammonium loading degrades the invertebrate aquatic species that the fish depend upon for food. So in addition to water, food supply is a big issue. Then there is the competition for food. Many species that have been introduced in the Delta have come through sources such as ballast water in transatlantic or transoceanic shipping vessels, dumping all kinds of things from all over the world. Bivalves or clams, both freshwater and saltwater clams, have taken up residence in the Delta and consume a huge amount of food in competition for fish like salmon and smelt. Then we have introduced species such as bass, that there's no question that they are consuming out-migrating salmon after spawning. Studies have shown on the Tuolumne River, one of the San Joaquin River tributaries, that 92 to 95% of the out-migrating salmon are being consumed by bass. So from the Stewardship Council's perspective, yeah, it's important to address conveyance. It's important to find better alternatives to managing a system that so many people depend upon. But if we're going to achieve the healthy, restored ecosystem in the Delta, it's going to take more than flow. It's going to take a concerted effort to deal with a number of these stressors, many of which I've just mentioned.
Do you feel that you have looked at other alternatives sufficiently? I mean, you've got kind of a mandate from the governor to focus on the twin tunnels. And as you know, many critics have felt that you haven't looked at alternatives enough. So what is your answer to the critics?
Well, in terms of a mandate, again, the Stewardship Council's mandate is to assure water supply reliability for the state. We've left that up to others to determine what is the best method to improve conveyance, because there's obviously a choke point in the Delta that is causing some areas of the state to not receive much water. And as an independent state agency, we again have a role as a covered action authority to prevent further harm in the Delta. BDCP, in terms of conveyance alternatives, since 2006 has considered a number of alternatives and is aligned on a preferred alternative based on consideration of all those others. The Stewardship Council has addressed the environmental impact report and then the supplemental impact report. And the thrust of our comments to the Resources Agency has been the need for a strong adaptive management program. There are so many questions. We know a lot about the Delta, but there's a lot that we don't know. And so whatever fix is ultimately selected to improve conveyance, we've got to have a way of determining what to monitor, how to collect the data, determine what kind of a platform that will be available so that there'll be access by anyone to that data, and then synthesize it in a way that policymakers can make changes or adjustments to whatever the plan is that is ultimately permitted. That's been the thrust of our agency's work, is to make sure that whatever is implemented is done so in a way that is managed to assure that a restored, healthy ecosystem in the Delta is one of the achievements of that.
If the twin tunnels do get the green light and are built, it probably won't be for 10 years, 20 years. In fact, it's 10 years of construction alone. So you would probably be looking at your son and daughter being the buyers of the water. Mm-hmm. Do you think they'll be able to afford the water?
Well, I live and farm in an area that's not dependent upon water transferred through the Delta. So as long as we continue to farm in this area, my family's not going to have to determine whether it's affordable or not. Ultimately, that decision has to happen right now. The state and the federal water contractors, both ag and urban, know enough about what the project will consist of, what the engineering and construction costs will be, to determine what's affordable and what's not. There are large segments of agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley that were developed out of the expectation that water exports through the Delta would be their primary water supply. And that hasn't happened in the last 3 or 4 years. And those folks are in a tough place. When you look at the value of their farmland with water and without water, and then you determine, can I afford whatever it's going to cost if this indeed will improve the water supply reliability for this area? The value of that water becomes pretty large. The ability to pay a significantly higher amount for water than they have previously would be probably determined as affordable if there is assurance that this is going to lead to a better surface water supply. I don't think that those assurances are available. I don't think that they are, that's going to be the evaluation. I don't think the cost of building the facilities is the impediment. I think it is the uncertainty over whether this is going to lead to a more available water or not. And that's what's up for consideration now before the State Water Resources Control Board, federal EPA, Fish and Wildlife, the fish agencies as they update their biological opinions for the change in the place of diversion. There's a lot of question marks right now. If you or I were going to purchase a car, before we write a check, we want to know how that car is going to perform. And I think right now that's where the state and the federal water contractors are in particular, to determine what exactly are we going to get if we write a check. In summary, I would say that the Delta Stewardship Council was created as an experiment in governance. To create an agency that has a responsibility to develop a long-term sustainable management plan for an area of ecological importance, such as the Delta is, and to do it in a way that does not allow the agency to dictate what shall be done. I'm very proud of the work that the Delta Stewardship Council has done. I'm very proud of the 3 years that we spent developing the Delta Plan, and then in addition to that, the Delta Science Plan. I'm very proud of the coalescing of 16 other state and federal agencies into what's known as the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. And the work that has come out of those 6-month meetings, particularly on the science front, to identify near-term, high-impact science actions that have been identified, activated, and now we're beginning to get the results of in rapid time. And this is all a result of the coordinating efforts that the Stewardship Council has employed to help other agencies become more aware of what their sister and brother agencies are doing. We've seen a greater level of cooperation among agencies, state and federal, on the science front, and that's encouraging. That's very encouraging to me, and one of the primary reasons why it's important to keep the Delta Plan enforced and active, and the Delta Stewardship Council continuing to do its role as a coordinator of multiple agency activities in the Delta.